Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Therapist Theater. It's the podcast where we take a look at relationships and mental health through the lens of movies, TV, and pop culture. I'm your host, Josh Treese. I've got a master's degree in marriage and family counseling and therapy, and I'm a practicing therapist in Music City, USA. I also love movies. I really love movies. I'm on a mission to help people more easily understand mental health and relationships, and help break down the stigmas surrounding counseling and therapy. And that's why every week, a guest therapist and I talk about a movie and what relationship or mental health issues it highlights. Thanks so much for downloading today's episode. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes, and while you're doing that, help the show out by giving it a 5-star rating and review it in the podcast app. Today in the theater, my guest is Michael Malloy. You know, we've had a couple of weeks of firsts here in the theater, and I think we should keep that going. So Michael is the first social worker that we've had on the show, and at close to a 43-year career, he's the longest-serving mental health professional. Or I should say he's the longest-serving we've had on the show. I can't verify if he's the longest-serving ever. Michael brought with him 2017's The Greatest Showman. IMDb says it celebrates the birth of show business and tells of a visionary who rose from nothing to create a spectacle that became a worldwide sensation. Ladies and gents, this is the moment you've been waiting for. Dim the lights, raise the curtain, and start the previews. Welcome to the theater. Mike, how are you today?
Reasonably well.
Good. It is so good to meet you. I like to start off every episode with asking my guest, why therapy? Why do you do what you do?
Well, there's a little background to that because I have a social work degree with an undergraduate degree in psychology, which of course is a pretty worthless degree unless you're going on to do something else. But I did choose social work because of the broader path and practice areas that you can go into. But I directed a nonprofit for the first 20 years of my career, which included, and I ended up the executive after being there for 2 years. And so I was administrator, but I also did some counseling myself. But then after being there for 20 years, I just liked the direct work better. But I just like the changing the world one person at a time rather than doing it. And of course, social work has that variation. You can get involved in...
you can go as broad or as focused as you want with social work.
You're right.
What was the original kind of seed of something that steered you towards it? Like you said, you had your undergrad in psychology.
Right.
Had you gone to therapy, in college, or did you like the idea of helping people through tough times?
I should have, but no, I wasn't bright enough at that point to go ahead and go to myself. But I actually graduated with a degree in psychology, and then talking with a pastor that I had some connections with at that point, he was the one that found a double master's program down in Texas, where I went to Southwestern Baptist Seminary and got a master's in religious education. Then I went to University of Texas and got a master's in social work, because what I thought I was going to do would be go into a church as a religious ed guy and start a social work of some sort related to the church.
A community program,
right,
kind of.
Yeah. Right. But what happened is while I was in that 4 years of graduate school, this place here in town came about in 1973.
Has your work in your time in private practice been geared towards any particular specialty or population?
So we created 2 different programs. One was a program to serve pastors in a anonymous kind of on a calling in line. Mm-hmm. The other was to work with gays and lesbians, giving them a place who had a faith base to try to safely come together and bring their faith and their sexuality into a safe place to talk about it, which in the early 80s, there was very little. And most of the stuff that was written in Christian literature was very negative.
Yeah.
I knew it was going to be controversial, but it just was not being done. Nobody was doing it.
Yeah.
So it started very slow and created groups, and then started. We just got clients from not only just right here in the metro area, but in other places around the Southeast. Sometimes guys would even move to Nashville to be a part of the groups. But what happened is in working with that clientele, two things happened. We started that work in about 83. Well, come 86, one of the very first guys we dealt with turned up HIV positive. Also what happened is I began to see that men are men. I don't care whether you're straight or whether you're gay. Many times, though, a gay man feels like he's less of a man or less masculine than a heterosexual guy is. And that is not true.
Do you find that he thinks that, or do you find that he's been told that and he's come to believe it?
Probably both. I think some of it is how... But then again, obviously, I would say the great majority of men I dealt with, which were hundreds of guys over the years, if I dealt with them in groups or individually, are what I always call the guys next door. You would not pick them out of a lineup. Gay men are just as varied as straight men are.
Right.
All of that got me into just doing men's work. So over my private practice, it's not that I don't see couples. A number of guys have chosen to be married and in relationships, and it's not that I don't have women as clients, but I've done more work with.
Sure.
One of the big things is for men to have places where they can be accountable, and all of that got me off into addictions, and that's where I first met Nate Larkin. I don't care what you have going on. My take is that we live in a very addictive culture, and we have socially acceptable addictions. With all the new digital and the things we carry around every day that can easily become these very addictive devices.
And it's almost been designed to help you hide it.
I've dealt with a lot of guys with sexual addiction, particularly. I am a Myers-Briggs INFJ personality type.
Same.
Are you?
Yeah.
Well, welcome to a very narrow little bunch of people, because we are the fewest, it's the smallest of all the combinations.
But when I was in ministry, every test I took was ENFJ, and as soon as I left, it went hard I, and I realized I had been, and in ministry, I would say it's a switch. Well, when I get on the church campus, I've got to turn on.
Yes.
And then I've got to turn it off.
Well, that's exactly, I told you I was a director of that nonprofit, and I could get up in front of a crowd of 1,000 people and raise money and all of that. That's definitely an extrovert. But my preference, and like I said, what did I do? I slipped back into a one-on-one,
yes,
more of an introvert, and my idea of a really great time is a good cup of coffee in the morning, one of my books, and curling up by the fireplace. That is like heaven to me. So,
well, let's transition into talking about the movie. What movie did you pick for us to talk about today?
The Greatest Showman.
And what is it about The Greatest Showman that attracted you to it?
Well, as I said to my buddy this morning, I said, one, Hugh Jackman is a guy that all of us guys love to hate. I mean, he's a great-looking guy. He can sing, he can dance, he can act.
He can be Wolverine.
He can be Wolverine. He can do anything.
He's going to be in a musical, and he's going to be Wolverine. Give me a break, buddy.
And he's lame as Rob.
Yeah.
I mean, so, but no, To me, it's a movie about men's issues, because he and Zac Efron, you have these two that join up, as circus partners, but you have this guy, born basically looked down upon, treated like dirt. Dad dies early. He becomes a street kid. It's implied that ultimately he must have gone and worked for the railroad or something like that, and then comes back after this young girl that he's met, and they've exchanged letters, comes back to her dad, who is wealthy and basically doesn't want to have him to have anything to do.
Was her dad the guy, so his father, I got the sense, was maybe a tailor or something along those lines, and there's a scene towards the beginning where he goes with his father to fit a man for a suit.
That was the guy that slapped him. Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, and that was really, I think, what kind of introduced you to the concept of, he was of a lower station, so to speak, caste, maybe, if you will, than the girl that he fell in love with. Because in that scene, she's having finishing lessons or etiquette lessons or something along those lines, and he makes her laugh. She spits out her tea. And her father, who's getting fitted for the suit by his father, comes over and slaps him in the face and says, "Stay away from my daughter." And his dad does nothing.
Yes.
Nothing.
Glad you noticed that he doesn't defend his son.
Yeah. And I looked over at my wife, and I thought to myself, that'd have been it. I mean, there is no way that another person is going to touch my kid and not have me all over him.
Yeah, but therein is obviously a broken piece in his father, in the boy's father. But then he quickly loses him. So he basically starts out his life with that trauma. Obviously, being in that situation, gets slapped by this girl's father is fairly traumatic, and then he loses his father in a few years. And then he comes back after having some accomplishment, and they want to marry. And, of course, her dad's still naysayer. You're not going to amount to anything. She'll be back. You can't make my daughter happy. But you've still got this pretty narcissistic character, and he's wanting to make a name for himself and be...
So you're saying Barnum. Can you? Okay, well, we've used that word a few times. Let's define it. So in this context, tell me what you mean by narcissist.
Narcissists are what we would say extremely self-centered people. I think that, ironically, at the core of them, they're very, very insecure people. But they are known for being very grandiose and no empathy. That's in the DSM, one of the cardinal, is they have no, and I mean no. You might say, do they have a little? No. I mean, no empathy for the other person in relational dynamics. That's pointed out later by the woman that he has the emotional affair with, the singer. She tells him, "You have no way of caring for anybody but yourself." She nails it.
Which is interesting because he says throughout the movie that he's doing all of this for his daughters. So that they won't, I mean, I know we'll get there, so that they won't have the same life that he did.
Right.
Which is really not about them.
Exactly. And the deal is he, as he goes out and begins to pull together all these misfits, because these people love to come and look at the macabre or just, the first one, he goes to the little midget guy he goes up to the door. His mom says, "I don't have a son." He says, "Oh, well, I know you do because I've seen you."
And he pulls out like a birth certificate.
Yeah.
I thought, creep.
Well, yes, because he's got a goal of what's going to butter his bread. And so he finally meets the guy. He wasn't young. And the guy says, "Oh, the people laugh at me, and you're going to, so you just want me to be out there so more people can laugh at me." And what did he say? He said, "Well, at least you can make money."
Well, no, the first thing he said was they're going to be laughing anyway.
Yes.
So why not get paid for it?
Exactly.
And I thought, if I was that guy, I don't think that I would have. That's not what's going to make me.
I think I would have punched him in a place where it would have hurt.
Yeah. But then he spins a story to get him on board, like, hey, I'm going to put you in a general's uniform. They're going to salute you.
Plays to his ego.
Uh-huh.
And so he joins in. And that's how he gets all the rest of the misfits. Mm-hmm. And the beauty of it, and this is where the critic, in the end, when they're sitting there on the steps of the burned-out building, the critic shows up. And he is a Barnum is a little softer at that point, saying, oh, great, here you are. You want to, kick a dog when he's down. And the guy says, well, I do have to say that, what you did do is you pulled all of these misfit people together, and it was kind of a black and white, shape, size, whatever. It was a celebration of humanity is the line that he used. Mm-hmm. And so he was really commending him and saying, what you did for these people who didn't have family and were stuck in the back bedroom of their homes is you gave them a family. And so ironically, even with the narcissistic drive that it was all for his, people would appreciate him and what he would be able to accomplish, he did accomplish for these other, and some of them said there at the end when finally Carlisle, his associate, comes in and says, well, I have put some money back, so basically I can save the day.
Yeah.
And one of I think it was the little midget guy game said, oh yeah, we know how you are, because they obviously pretty well quickly got Barnum's number. Mm-hmm. Especially when he gets high and mighty. Part of him even bringing in Carlisle, as he says, was wanting to be able to, how do I impress all the haves?
He wanted legitimacy.
Yeah. How do I catch the eye of the money people? And that's where he brings in Jenny Lind and puts her on the stage. That's still all about him. And so when he finally accomplishes that and they have the party afterwards and he's showing them around, and then the misfits and the bearded lady shows up at the door and he won't let them in. Mm-hmm.
And I got to tell you, up until that part of the movie, I kept thinking, here he is, clearly a person carrying a wound, carrying trauma, but had become this guy who is the champion of the misunderstood, the little guy. He had risen up, he had conquered, he'd become better. And then all of a sudden it shows him catching them at the door with it a little more than cracked, but talking to them without letting the door go, and then closing the door on them. And I was like, whoa. What is and that was the first time I think in the movie that I had seen, there's something else going on in him. That's not just a champion for the
there's
little
your
guy.
Narcissism again.
Yeah.
That it's way more about what's going to serve his purposes. Mm-hmm. It's very difficult to be in a relationship with a narcissist because it's always about them. It's a very one-sided dynamic. But they're so charismatic, just like he was. He was a very charismatic fellow, and that sweeps people off their feet. And if you only know him from a very public, that was the way with my father. He was a big guy. He was 6'2", 6'3". He was very gregarious, very outgoing. Everybody publicly just thought he was the scoutmaster when I was in Cub Scouts, and I would have little Cub Scout friends come up to me and say, "Oh, Mike, your dad is so much fun. I wish he was my dad." And in my 10 and 11-year-old mind, I would think, I do too. I'll trade you even Steven. I don't know. And that did not hit me until I was in therapy as an adult.
Yeah.
That's not a normal thought for a 9 or 10-year-old boy.
Yeah.
Because I could remember that thought. So there's this public grandiosity, very impressive, bigger than life, but that's all there is.
But it's for a purpose.
Yes. It's to make them look good and feel better, to feel their ego. And that's what he was doing there, is that as long as it served his purposes, but if you're going to embarrass me now in front of all these people, then we launch into what I think is the most powerful song in the whole movie, when the bearded lady and they step out in the street. This is me.
What's funny, sometimes while we're watching movies, prepare for shows, I'll go to the IMDb page on my phone, and they have a trivia kind of section of just little fun facts about it. That particular song was written, two of the guys that made the movie found out they had the chance to pitch it to a studio, and they wrote it on the way to the pitch. So the most powerful song in the movie that was nominated for an Oscar, that song was written in the shortest amount of time of any song of that movie.
Well, and I think if, just another aside, there is on YouTube, you can go back and hear the director of the movie. He introduces a practice session for that song. And he says, I've never had an experience like this in my entire career in a practice session. Because what he's doing, he's coaching her. I can't remember her name, but she's from Hawaii, the woman, the bearded lady that sings that. And she's behind a music stand, and he says, now this song is one where you need to feel it. You need to get out from behind the music stand and let it take over. Well, she starts out behind the music stand, and then about the second, minute or two later, she steps out from behind it. What's blocking his name again?
Hugh Jackman?
Hugh Jackman's there. All the other musicians are there. It's this emotional. They're in tears by the end because the song literally takes over them. And I think that's the beauty of it, because obviously when she's singing it in the streets, you've got these highbrows that, and what in the end Carlyle called the simple-minded people, and the people in the streets that are saying, get out of the thugs that burn the building down. So we don't ever get away from our demons. I think that's another thing that some of us believers have been taught, is that you reach a place of nirvana. You said something about that a while ago. That does not happen. That's where, having been raised in that holiness and entire sanctification, was such a deceitful lie.
Yeah.
Because then you're always behind the eight ball. You never can. There's no accomplishing it, because we all have an idea of certainly who we are on the inside, and this idea that, okay, that I'm so far from the mark. That was always what's the definition of sin? Well,
missing the mark.
Missing the mark. Well, who hasn't? But so yes, that movie can take off in so many directions. To have a wife like he had, the women in his life are the ones that really speak to him and have some of the powerful lines at the end of the movie, because his wife ultimately says, you want everybody to like you. But she said, there's no way to that. She said, all you really need is a few people who really love you.
Yeah. He says, I've been doing it all for you guys. And she said, I knew who I married. All I wanted was him.
Yeah.
And there's my wife and I, in our dating, and one of the things that's been kind of present throughout our whole relationship is the musical Hamilton. And have you?
I haven't seen it, but
so even just listening to the soundtrack, there's a song in it called "That Would Be Enough," and it's his wife singing to him, because he is also a very ambitious person who is taking on all these things. Was poor when they got married and trying to build this life, quote unquote, for her. And he's going off fighting in wars. He's trying to get all this money. And she says, as long as you come home at the end of the day, that would be enough.
Right.
It's just that she, and she says something about this being the first chapter where you decide to stay. And there's a song in the movie in Greatest Showman called "Never Enough."
Yes.
Then I looked at my wife and I said, "This is like the inverse of that, that I'll never be enough for you."
And did you see that his wife started out singing that, and Jenny Lynn ended it up?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, it was both these women in his life that see that. Again, there's the lack of empathy for the other person. Jenny Lynn says, you don't know how to care for other people. Outwardly, it looks like, my God, you made a place for these misfits and all of that. And so it's not that he wasn't accomplished. But obviously, and Richard Rohr says, the only thing that ever really changes any of us, and this is pretty unsettling as a therapist, is either great love or great suffering. And very often they're intertwined.
Yeah.
And what finally got to him, sitting on the burned out steps, being accused of an affair, being broke, almost losing his wife and kids, losing the house. Okay. Great suffering. So, but I think that's the nature of as a therapist many times, it's helping people get to whatever trauma in their own life, because a lot of times we buried it because we don't want to unpack it because of the pain around it. I mean, John Bradshaw, who is always big in alcohol recovery and did a whole lot of, used to have all these things on PBS. I heard him speak in conferences more than once where he said, most recovery work is grief work. I know I took, when I turned 50, and at times, like so many men, wheels start wobbling on your car if not flying off. I went out for 3 weeks of intensive therapy at a place in Scottsdale, Arizona. You see multiple therapists all day long, from either 8 or 9, unless you have a group at 7 in the morning, all the way to like 9 at night, every day of the week.
Talk about intensive.
Yeah, and I did that 3 weeks.
Wow.
They literally took me apart, and I was asking for that. I was just saying, I'm at a point, and this is how my brain worked at that point. Okay, you spent 50 years, half a century of your life helping other people. It's okay now, Mike, to take 3 weeks out of your life to go.
You've earned it.
Get your own crap together.
Yeah.
That and the rite of passage I did with Richard are still to this date are the two most powerful earth-moving experiences. The reason I brought that up, though, the first week was just laced with lots of tears. And I told him literally on Friday afternoon of that week, I said, if this is what it's going to be for another 2 weeks, I'm out of here. It wasn't, but it was also about inner child. I'd always heard those theories as a therapist, but I was pretty down on them. Well, the reason I was is I had spent a good part of my adult life not attending or parenting my inner child very well at all. I downloaded a version of my own father and let him take after my kid. They taught me a very different... I mean, that was... I mean, it's a scene from a movie. If I ever... I actually got down on my hands and knees and apologized because they had me take pictures, like so many times in therapy. You bring a picture of yourself when you're... I had my kindergarten picture. And they told me, when I got to the first weekend, I said, I don't know Arizona. I'm kind of bummed out. What do I do the whole weekend? And he looked at me and said, well, you know that kid we've been trying to introduce you to this week? Take him out and make sure he had a good time. And I looked at him and I said, okay, Ralph, and he was ahead of the clinic. And I said, look, okay, cut the crap. I'm really serious. I'm kind of worried. And he said, well, I'm serious too. He said, and then suddenly another more intelligent voice popped on in my head and said, you are paying these people a lot of money. And one of the things they were nailing me on, 2 or 3 therapists said, and they always say that therapists are the worst clients because we're always trying to figure out where they're going and what they said. Quit it. Quit trying to be the client. And so I took that kid. He suggested I go to Sedona. Have you ever been there?
No.
Oh,
I think I've only been to Scottsdale, and it was just for like a weekend gig I had where I flew in, I did video work, and I flew out.
Well, and I did it in July, which is not the time to be in Scottsdale. But anyway, I did take him up, and it was I got up, acted like I had a 6-year-old with me, and so we went up there. We went to a place called Tlaquepaque, which is inside Sedona. It's a recreated Guadalajara, New Mexico.
Wow.
Lots of restaurants, fountains, shops. This thing on the floor right here next to my foot, that rock down there, it was in a shop, and I looked down. It was a snowflake, lasered into this rock. And I bent down and picked it up and flipped it over, and it says unique on the other side. And I looked at him and I said, there's been a number of things you've been called throughout your life. That's not one of them. But that really does pretty well describe you. And so I obviously picked up the rock, bought it, and we carried it around till lunchtime till I could go to the car. We had hot dogs for lunch.
You're saying we are. I mean, you and your childhood self. Yeah. I mean, so are you?
I mean, I
literally
was trying
by
to
yourself,
get into it,
but you're metaphorically, kind of symbolically with your childhood self.
Yeah,
okay.
I took the picture with me. I literally acted like I had this kid roaming around with my, holding on to his hand. And like I said, I had hot dogs for lunch. They have these tour companies out there. They had pink Jeep tours, and I thought, you probably like that, wouldn't you? So we go ride these pink Jeeps with there's this other family that went with it. It was a blast.
Wow.
And about middle of the afternoon, I'd headed back to see more of Tlaquepaque, and it was dawning on me what a wonderful time I had that day.
Didn't even know you could have it.
The idea of letting the kid go and have fun. There's a task to be, and always riding him. And I was there up on a balcony looking. It was a gorgeous afternoon, and I literally it was all alone. It's a fairly there were a few people at Sedona, but I actually got out on my knees and apologized to him and said, "Okay, I get it. I get it. I've not parented you well at all. No more. No more." Yeah. So that was just one of the events that happened during those 3 weeks.
And I think the movie, it does a good job of showing something that I know that I really have struggled with and have worked on in me too. When he was a kid, he was defined by his class or his socioeconomic standing and really told, this is who you are. And his dad didn't do anything to teach him any different.
Right.
So as he is growing up and gets his own family, his own daughters, what is really his goal, his task, what he believes, his motivation is to accomplish the opposite of what he was as a kid. So for him, anything that is the opposite of that is what I'm after. I want wealth. I want fame. I want station. I want, influence, which was something that for me was true as well. I mean, not necessarily those things, but I want the opposite of what I was given.
Well, usually it's money related and what money will buy.
Right. And what I think that he, as well as I, didn't understand is, the opposite is not, it doesn't equal that you are free from that. It doesn't equal that you are in control. You're still under the same amount of control. You're still enslaved by it. You're just telling yourself that getting the opposite sets you free when really
you're not free.
You're not free at all.
No, that's where one of my other movies, I just recommended it again this week. Just got the DVD back from The Kid, Bruce Willis.
That was last week's episode.
Was
it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, because I said, okay, there's another one. This kid on the sidewalk has a major trauma when his dad chews him out about you're going to kill your mother. And so what does he do? He ultimately goes out there and works like a dog to accomplish himself, be very successful. And then his kid shows up. And I love, some of the things, because his kid says, you're kidding me? You mean you're telling me that you're like 40 years old, you don't have a girlfriend,
you don't have a dog?
You don't have a dog.
Yeah, he became the opposite of what he was as a kid because he thought that would set him free, but it didn't.
No. That's the reason I'm saying if you don't do your shadow work and unpack your own baggage, you're never going to be free. And somehow in the church we've agreed with burying it, that somehow, or you just quickly, okay, I did wrong, sorry, and then, but you don't ever. A long time ago, I said, the one of the churchy words we've used over the years, I don't hear it much anymore, repentance. Well, the very definition of the term means to choose to turn from. Well, how are you going to choose to turn from something if you haven't sat with it long enough to figure out how you... An addiction, that's a huge element of it, of where was the slippery slope? What happened 2 or 3 steps before I made the choice to make the major stupid choice?
Yeah, well, and I think that one of the things that the church gets really wrong about that, too, is thinking that addiction and recovering from it is a matter of choice.
Yeah.
When I had Nate on, we talked about, I had gone back to Trevecca and spoken at their group supervision on addiction, and I'd found this clip from a John Piper sermon where he talked about, there's no such thing as addiction, especially addiction to porn. It's all a matter of, do you have the right motivation? And he said, if you're in front of the computer about to look at something and a black hooded ISIS member drags your wife into the room with a knife to her neck and says, if you look at that, I'm going to kill your wife, you're not going to look at it. He said, it's a matter of motivation. And I said, man, you have got it the farthest from the truth that you could. That is an external motivator. That is not an internal motivator. So even by your argument, that is a fallacy. And I think a lot of times the church just thinks, well, if you want it bad enough, then you'll choose something different. And like I said, this brings in the fear of me going back to talk to people is it's not a matter of wanting. Every addict is incredibly good at quitting. They're really bad at staying quit.
Right.
I mean, they are champion quitters.
Well, and again, it's whatever... It's the emotions on the inside, and how do I deal with where I'm at on the inside internally with all the feelings that are going on? What do I do to those? Even the church. I remember as a young guy, I was at a conference out in California, and I can't remember one of the guys that was there, and he said, I got to step away. I have to go to a meeting of FA. And I said, what's that? And he said, Fundamentalists Anonymous. And I thought, oh, my God, I wish I could take that and package it and take it back to Nashville.
Yeah.
Because that's a lot of what is going on. I won't mention the denomination, but I have said, tongue-in-cheek, that denomination paid off my mortgage because I just think that because of the
trauma and the damage that's been done,
because what I'm grateful for, having raised in the Nazarene Church, is the emphasis on the fact that God is spirit. Richard is a mystic. Well, I too am a mystic, and all that means, that doesn't mean what it sounds like to some
You're
new
not
age.
Dr. Strange. Yeah.
Well, I'm pretty strange, but I mean, that it buys into that God is a massive mystery, and this idea of getting your head around Him. It's not about this intellectual thing. And then people hear me say that, and they see my offices and my study is lined with books, and I love to read. I do, but that's not it. It's not that you find your way to God. Like we said a minute ago, I don't find my way to Him. He finds His way to me. Mm-hmm. It's like, I think, what was her name? Oh, good God. She said, all I do is move myself over into the flow of His grace, mercy, and His love. I'm pretty well convinced He's got a handle on how bumbling humanity is, and all you have to do is read the history books and see how inept and evil mankind has been. He's done it all. I think letting go, and that's many times of letting go of how I thought I'd figured it out. Mm-hmm. And so it is the essence of moving more toward that spirit being. I think we are spirit. People have said, okay, am I really human being having a spiritual experience, or I'm a spiritual person?
Oh, C.S. Lewis.
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely the latter. I think we're spiritual beings in these units that we call human bodies.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's who Jesus was. I think he was, it said he took on the form of man, which then, if you're thinking, means that is not his natural form.
Mm-hmm.
He is, as I said, I think maybe Star Wars got it better, that he is a force. He is an energy.
Although they ruined it in the prequels of the midichlorians.
Well, and I hope that because there's a new sequel coming out on Matrix.
Oh yeah,
that I hope that the first two Matrix were pretty good, but then it went to the ditch.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the whole idea of we are spiritual beings, and the churches that at least incorporate that side of and I believe in the Trinity. But when you start reading Scripture and reading Rohr, and his most recent one, the Universal Christ, it's very controversial. Of course, Richard at times in certain circles, I don't read them, but I know he's seen as a heretic. Mm-hmm. I mean, just a massive leading you off into apostasy.
Yeah.
I think that's totally, years ago when I first heard those things, I was into, Rob Bell and McLaren. I liked him, and I thought, you've been reading for the last 20 years a bunch of heretics. And then I got to thinking, wait a minute, Jesus was always identified as a heretic. So you're in a pretty good crowd, because some have said that the heretics of one generation are the saints of the next. Because they are people, in the movie he talks about imagination a lot of the time, and he had a vivid imagination about, which is what dreams are made of, is somebody who has the ability to imagine. I think it was Einstein who said, imagination is more important than knowledge. It's part of the reason why this little guy on my shelf, all four of my grandkids have one of those. Some of them are bigger, but he is from Disney World down there on the, and his name is Figment, a figment of my imagination. Because I've told them, I said, to be able to dream and to be able to have an imagination and to think beyond the box, that's what creativity is. Mm-hmm. Well, people at times are frightened by people who, well, you were talking about how you started this broadcast and why the first idea you had, and then how that, but they just keep, that's the nature of imagination, is that once it gets triggered, and are there times that you blow it, and it's just like in the movie. The first attempt that he made, they didn't get anybody to show up.
Well, here's, you just connected something for me. That was failing. How many tickets did we sell? 3, and then his wife holds up 3 tickets. And he's putting his little girls to bed, and they say, everything in there is dead. You need something alive.
Exactly.
And what is imagination if it's not creativity come to life? It is life.
Right.
And that's when things took off.
Look at what Disney has done in the world. My word.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just all built on this unbelievable imagination of, and I love his thoughts about that, if you go down there and you, right inside the gate of the Magic Kingdom, it tells about the story and what he dreamed of doing, and that once you walk through the gate, while you're there, you're in a totally different world. You don't even think about what's going on in the broader world out there. Well, they've done a pretty good job in being able to make that happen. But I think seeing, that's a part of the wonderful thing of having had a career here in this city and working over the years with a lot of creative people, whether they're songwriters or whatever venue they're creative, artists. I've had artists. One artist I had one time, I worked with him for quite a while, and he would literally bring his portfolio in every week of the paintings that he had ultimately done. Mm-hmm. And we'd talk about what was behind the motivation to paint the particular thing he painted. And he was more he wasn't into realistic landscape. It was more a lot of metaphorical and kind of whimsical and stuff like that, and it was a lot of fun. There are times, not all the time, but there are times sometimes where I feel like I don't know who should be paying who.
Well, that leads to a question that I like to ask everybody is, tell me something that you've learned from your clients.
Oh, my gosh. Where do you start? That we're all the same. That I feel like I'm, as the old saying goes, I am just one beggar telling another beggar where to go for bread. And if I don't follow the directions or that we sit and talk about myself, I'm no better than, I said, that's the difference in doing this than it is working at a factory on widgets or retail or whatever else. We are in process as much as they are in process. And I'm one of those, whether you're a pastor or a therapist, you can't take anybody any further than you've gone. Mm-hmm. So if you don't keep going, and what I've found is it gets thinner as you keep going, because a lot of people give up, or they just sit on their hands, or they think they've got it, and they haven't. Whether that's professionally, most of us are forced to do continuing education, which in some ways is a joke. But then I think others is I love up there in my committee in my heads, which is one of the tools that I teach to clients, and many have come back and said that's probably one of the best tools. I have what I call the professor, and he just likes learning. I mean, it's just fun to learn something new. I take Smithsonian, I take National Geographic. They're just articles that I read in there that are fascinating, that have absolutely nothing to do with the work that I do.
Oh, yeah.
And in one way, if you have a more systems-based, everything's connected, yes, it does.
Well, it's like, Nate's podcast, Positive Sobriety. It's something that I talk about with my clients as well. Negative sobriety, taking a thing away that's hurting you. Positive sobriety, adding things in to give you more life, to help you become more you. And I think if we're not, I guess to use a counseling term, if we're not practicing good self-care, if we're not feeding ourselves, if we're not, Josh becoming more Josh, Mike becoming more Mike, then, we're not living life.
And you can't, if you stop and think about it, and this is where INFJs, we overthink everything. But if you think about it, there's no way to live outside of your own frame of reference.
Right.
Part of it is, how do I expand my frame of reference? And that's where people say, boil it down. What advice after being a therapist for 43 years? And I go, 1, read as much as you can outside of your own area. Don't just read stuff that simply supports what you believe already. Read stuff that's going to stretch you. And then travel as much as you can. Meet people from different cultures, different colors, different shapes, different sizes. Go hang with some of those people in the circus that have a very different life, a very different view. But what you're going to find if you sit with them for any length of time, they're no different than you are.
Right.
That's what I guess in the travels that we've been lucky enough to do. Many times my wife and I, people will say, well, do you travel with other couples? And we'll go, well, no, we just go by. And we go on, a lot of times we go on tours where you're on these buses with 40 some other people. That's as much of the meeting people from, we just entertained last week a couple that we met on a trip. They were coming through here from Australia.
Oh, cool.
And so just to hear their perspective on how they observed Nashville and how we lived, the cars we drove, from somebody who lives in Australia. one, it made me think, as much as I hate the traffic in this town anymore, I'm not ready to move to Australia. But again, getting outside your own, don't being afraid to reach outside where you normally are. And that's where even getting back when we were talking to those pastors on that line back at the nonprofit, I would try to get them. I said, you need to go find other men you can be accountable with. Well, they did not want to do that within their own circles because they knew that was often a hatchet to their own job. If the district superintendent found out about it, then they'd lose their pastorate. And I said, well, then go to the Baptist guy, go to the Methodist guy, go to the Assemblies guy. What? Because it's almost it's almost like, what are you afraid of? I mean,
well, what's funny is that probably had not occurred to them.
Yeah, I guess because they are so. You know how church life is. It's like, and I graduated from a Baptist seminary. I always tell people, because the Baptists fire you up so evangelically. I was going to save the world by myself in 6 months. Give me a year at the long,
So let's say that somebody was listening to today's episode and they feel like they could really connect with you and would love to see you as a client. How can they get a hold of you?
Well, I still have one of those classic things called a phone number. I'll just call and leave a message on there. I don't have a secretary, so you have to leave a message and I'll call you back. Or I think the best thing is just my email address, which is just my name at Comcast.net. Michael, not Mike. Michael Malloy.
At Comcast.net.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you, Mike, so much for being my guest today. It has been an absolute pleasure, and I'm just so grateful that that I had the chance to sit with you and hear from you.
Well, it's been fun for me too.
Nice. Awesome. Hey, everybody. I want to let you know all of the places that our community, which is still in need of a name, can be found online. First and foremost, there's the podcast, which you are currently listening to. Obviously, you found it on the podcast app that you're listening to it on, but you can also subscribe and listen on Spotify, Pandora, Google Play, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Overcast. Next, we've got a Twitter. Check it out at twitter.com, username @therapisttheater, THTR. So THERAPISTTHTR. After that, we've got an Instagram. You can find us in the Instagram app @therapisttheater, all spelled out that time. Finally, you can find us on YouTube by searching Therapist Theater. And if you want to drop us a line via email, just send it to therapisttheater@gmail.com. In fact, why not email in your best suggestion for what our community should call ourselves? Hello, my love.
Hey.
We're broadcasting right now from our guest bedroom.
Yep.
Which means that I think we've officially podcasted from every room in our house.
Not if you count the bathrooms.
That's
which
true.
Are rooms in the kitchen.
Coming next week.
We have done the kitchen.
Yeah. So, first ever social worker on the show as a guest.
Oh, I was gonna say
as a guest. Yeah. Audience still working on convincing Leigh-Ann to be a guest.
They get me every episode. They've
That's
got
true,
enough.
but it'd be different as a guest. So what did you think about the interview with Mike?
It was great. It was really cool to hear from a social worker and cool to hear about his experience. Kind of sounds like he's sort of done the range of like running an organization and then also doing clinical practice, which I think is cool. Like there's he has like a variety of perspectives because of that, which I think is neat.
And I would assume, and you and I have talked about systems a little bit, but like his education as a social worker allowed him to go broad at the beginning and then come, in a little tighter for counseling and therapy towards the end.
Yeah.
Towards the end, he's been doing it for stuff like Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I love about social work. And he talked about it a little bit, so I won't get into it too much, but just like the wide range of careers and like things that you can do within social work.
Yeah.
And the movie was good. I've been listening to the soundtrack.
Oh, man.
I didn't think that I would. I didn't think that I would get, I don't know, what do you call it?
Hooked?
Yeah, like, I mean, it, it was so popular when it came out and everybody was listening to the soundtrack after it. And I didn't think it would get me, but those 3 songs, man, they really got me.
So you're listening to 3 songs off the soundtrack.
Yeah, that is true. I'm listening to This Is the Greatest Show, This Is Me, and I forgot the last one.
Does it start with This Is?
No, I think it's like the home one. It's the one that they sing at the end before he runs back to his family. I forgot what it's called.
Oh, I thought that was like a reprise of The Greatest Show.
No.
Oh,
Different song.
cool.
So let's see. During the interview, whenever you guys were talking about, you were talking about the movie, and you were talking about the part where Barnum is a kid, and the dad of
Barnum.
the girl, the dad of the girl slaps him, and his dad doesn't do anything. And you guys both seemed to sort of share like a point of view that, and I agree that that's super traumatic, and for the dad not to intervene probably affected Barnum in some way. I forget which one of you said this, but you guys kind of talked about that being a sign or like an indicator that something was off or something was broken in Barnum's dad. And I think I took that scene a little bit differently. I thought.
Well, I don't know if I thought that. I just said if anybody ever touched my kid,
yeah,
I'd be on him like a spider monkey.
But I think even that perspective kind of looks at Barnum's dad not doing anything as sort of like a fault, like as he should have done something. I can't believe he didn't do anything.
Sure.
And so, and just when I watched that, I just saw it a little different. I think it was more indicative of the power dynamics in the room than a fault or a failing of his to not act. Like, I'm sure he wanted to, and I'm sure that's his same instinct, is what I thought. But like, that person was an employer of his, and also he obviously wasn't like, he didn't have a lot of resources to have been, to have his kid along with him and all of that good stuff. So like, yeah, I don't know. I just saw that scene a little different. So yeah. I thought I would share. Also, and this is going to get a little abstract, and I don't have everything fully thought out, so maybe help me a little bit. But you guys talked a lot about, the childhood self, which, by the way, you should tell him about Rocket Man.
I did.
Oh, well, in the interview, you guys talked about the kid, not Rocket Man, but
yeah,
I thought
Rocket
Man would be a good one. So you're talking about the childhood self. He was talking about this day that he had where he was kind of supposed to take his childhood self out for a day of fun, which I thought was a really cool and like, oh, I don't know. There was part of me that was just going, oh, the whole time that he was talking about that. Because I think that's really sweet and cool. And like, what if we all did that as adults? Like, just had a day where we let our inner child like go free. But while he was talking about that, in my head appeared this comparison of, or like the movie being some sort of, symbolic like representation of childhood self and the adult. And I think at the moment I was thinking, oh, Barnum is the adult when he's not letting the circus people into that party and stuff like that, and he's sort of, I don't know. He's just being rude. He's not being a good guy. And then the circus people as the childhood self who like just want to be free and themselves and have fun and find joy in things. And then at the end, when in my metaphor, the childhood self and the adult are more integrated. And in the movie, when Barnum has kind of had his realizations and like he has the heart to heart with all of his circus people and they decide to start again, there's this more complete like joining and like there's joy and celebration and community. And it's like he's given them a space to have freedom and I don't know, and to be fully themselves. So That's it. That's my metaphor. Trademark.
I like it. I give it a rating of Jimothy.
Thank you. And then the last thing I think was I don't know, talking about Barnum's motivations, I was with you in that the whole time I kept thinking, like, I think up until, what was the part that you said you realized his
It was
motivation?
when he shut the circus performers out of the room.
Yes.
That was when I was like, oh, no. What are you doing?
Yes.
Yeah.
I, like, the whole time I was like, something's going to happen. Like, something's wrong. I don't know what it is. Like, I can't tell. And then same thing, like when he shut the door on them or whatever, I was like, oh, what does this mean? So just in trying to figure out his motivations, you guys were talking about how he said that what he was doing is for the kids, but it was kind of clear, like, throughout the movie that it wasn't for his family, like it was for him. And I think that's true, but I was thinking about this scene where they're on the roof and it's the daughter's birthday and he makes her a wish machine. Mm-hmm. And there's this kind of dreamy little sequence where they watch everything, they watch the lights spinning. And then she says that she wants ballet slippers. And it just seems like in that whole scene and in that moment, he is having this time of, like, it just seems like he does really want to provide for his family in that particular scene. So I was thinking about that and kind of thinking through, like, oh, is his motivation purely selfish? Is there any of it that's for his family? And then I just sort of realized I think maybe it was more pride and shame that motivated him. Like, I think that's what was going on in that scene, is maybe he was having a lot of shame that he couldn't provide slippers and that, like, yeah, that he couldn't provide for his family. And so it was still like a selfish motivator, but not purely greed. Like, it wasn't just money and fame. I think some of it was also pride and shame.
Yeah.
Oh, did that rhyme a little bit? Money and fame, pride and shame.
Listen, just put it in the verse of the rap song that's going to be the theme to the outro in season 2. Well, I think that goes on to support, no one is all good or all bad. Mm-hmm. So, like, even Barnum, in his pursuit of glory, is not all bad. He still loves his daughters. He still loves his wife. I do think that at times he maybe tucked his shoulder and ran a little too fast towards his goals, and I think it at least it seemed like forgot about his wife and daughters at times. Yeah. But I mean, he did love them. So just an example of people are complicated, and none of us are all one thing.
Huh? I wish we could all just be simple. I'm just kidding. It's great that we're complicated. I've had a long day, everybody.
Yeah. Anything else, my love?
No, I don't think so.
Perfect. So, Greatest Showman. Buy, rent, or pass?
Uh-oh. I don't know. I really don't. I mean, I think if you have the money to spare, then go ahead and buy it. Why not? The musical numbers are so fun. And, I don't know. That's all. But if you're short on money, then just rent. If you want to choose the movies that you have in your home really carefully and wisely, then maybe just rent it and see what you think. But definitely watch it. I mean, you decide for yourself. What I'm saying is that I can't decide if I want us to buy it. That's what's happening right now.
Well, that's the game, though, is you got to pick buy, rent, or pass.
No. Don't hold me to a binary.
Well, it's a trinary, actually, buy, rent, or pass.
Yeah, but I've narrowed it down, and I'm not gonna pick between the two.
Could you please pick?
Ugh. Rent for now, buy later.
I'll say rent. I mean, I think it's worth a rent. I wouldn't buy it, though.
Well, we're gonna buy it later, so.
Well, there we go. Now that the dog has walked back in the room, that's
He's telling us that it's time.
Yeah, it's time. Well, dog, we're going to go ahead and raise the lights, lower the curtain, and say that for this week, the theater is closed.